Let's talk real quick about the historical development of sociology. And basically, sociology kind of evolved out of the scientific and economic revolutions of the mid to late 19th century, so late 1800s. The rise of industries, cities, capitalism, labor unrest, all of that kind of combined to influence the rise of sociology as a science. So, what we're going to look at real quick in this section is what I call the heavyweights. Now, you will not find that term in the book. That's something I just kind of made up because the heavyweights tend to be the guys that everybody knows. And so the guys that we're going to look at here are people that essentially anybody who's taken Soc, they'll know and recognize these guys. Okay? First one is Auguste Comte. Now, Auguste Comte is considered the father of sociology. He's actually the first person to use the term sociology back in 1842. He studied social problems created by the French Revolution in the early 1800s. Therefore, he kind of believed that there was a need to systematically study human behavior in order to improve people's lives. He also believed that sociology was the most important science because it directly affected people's lifestyles. Second person is Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx, you've probably heard of him before. Marx had very radical beliefs, very openly critical of existing government structures, and he was never totally accepted anywhere in Europe during his lifetime. He died in poverty. However, his beliefs have influenced people for literally a century and a half. He believed that the economy was the prime organizing force in society. Believed that society was divided between people who control production. Now remember, he lived in the time period of the Industrial Revolution where you had industries and you had a lot of common workers. So he believed that society was divided between the people who controlled the factories or controlled the production and the common laborers. He believed there was a big power struggle between the two groups, the owners and laborers. He believed conflict was the prime motivating force in society. We'll talk more about this as we go through the semester, a lot about Marx. During the 1840s, he actually attended secret meetings in London as part of an illegal coalition of labor unions. They were known as the Communist League. And he soon helped to develop the Communist Manifesto, which argued that the masses of people who have no resources other than their own labor should unite and fight to overthrow the capitalist society. So in other words, what he was talking about is the rich versus the poor, and the idea that the poor should unite to battle the rich. His ideas basically have inspired communist revolutions in Russia, China, Cuba, even Vietnam over the last century. Okay, let's talk about Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer viewed society as like a human body with many biological parts. He is very influenced by Darwin and the concept of survival of the fittest. And Spencer believed that the best part of society, the best parts of society, would naturally survive over time. And this theory became known as social Darwinism. Now, social Darwinism was very popular during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Politicians basically allowed big companies to become bigger and stronger and eventually become monopolies because they were essentially unchecked by government. Eventually, though, during the Great Depression, when literally a third of our workforce was out of jobs, the idea of social Darwinism kind of fell out of favor. Government decided they had to do something to kind of monitor and take care of what was going on in business at the time. So, but social Darwinism, that's Spencer. Next person is Emile Durkheim. Okay, Emile Durkheim. And Durkheim was the first professor of sociology. He's also the first person to apply the scientific method to Soc in his study on suicide. Um, his study on suicide, he was so strict with following the rules of the scientific method that his findings back, from back in what I think it was 1895, his findings on that study still hold true today. Now, like Spencer, Durkheim saw society as kind of a body of interrelated parts. But he went further than that. He said that each part had a function. He believed that every single thing that continues to exist in society holds a function. And his beliefs about society being made up of different parts which serve functions, those beliefs have influenced Soch for over a century. So he's another big one that we will talk about. And Max Weber. Max Weber, so far we've talked about guys who had like huge ideas or concepts about society at large. Weber is not one of those guys. He believed he was much more interested in how society affected the individual or the particular group. He wasn't concerned in coming up with some major theory of society as a whole, like we talked about with Durkheim and Marx and Spencer. Instead, he studied groups within society and their effect upon individuals and their feelings. And he developed a concept known as Verstehen. Now, Verstehen is where the sociologist has to put themselves in the place of the person that they're studying. They have to empathize with the person's feelings in order to understand behavior. If you're studying someone, especially of a different culture, you really have to get to know that person and the culture and know what they're thinking and feeling to be able to understand and make a good judgment about what's going on. Weber also devised a tool which is sometimes used today. It's a concept known as an ideal type. Now, when you see the word ideal, do not think perfection. Okay, that's not what it means. Ideal in this case does not mean perfect. An ideal type is basically a made-up model of a particular concept that can be used as a measuring rod against which actual cases can be evaluated. It simply lists various characteristics of a concept. For example, later in the semester, we're going to talk about things like family. We'll talk about bureaucracies, economic systems, things like that, where essentially you can come up with a list of criteria. Let's take, for example, a bureaucracy. You could come up with a list of characteristics of a bureaucracy, and that's called an ideal type. Then you could take, for example, a school system or some large business, and you could look at that and evaluate that business or that school system and see if they have the characteristics of the bureaucracy. If they do, then you could define those things to be bureaucracies. So just remember, ideal types does not mean perfect. It's just a set of characteristics that we're going to measure against. So it's kind of like a measuring rod. Okay? Let's stop at that point. Those are the bigwigs. Those are the guys that you will always hear about in the history of Soch.